people, when they leave India, they don't necessarily think of caste as something they need to consciously carry. They carry it as something that belongs to their cultural appetite. That's something that's their, so to say, a lightweight carry on that they can take on and engage with a fellow American or any other person in any other country. The Indian elites also wanted to be part of that. They were not invited, but they wanted to be part of it. So you see the likes of uninvited guests like Priyanka Chopra and all these Western-based celebrities, or also their acolytes.
Right.
They were really kind of posting on it. And I was like, hold on, just take a step back. I mean, this is great, but do you see how ironical is that? Like, what you have done in your life to really make a life of a black person more equal? Let's forget about black person. What have you done in your own home country where you have crowned yourself Miss India?
Done to make Dalits more integrated and as equals.
So the elites here are inferior here. And for them, they want to have best of the both worlds. And it's unfortunate that the caste view presents and centralizes your own self, that you obsess the world only through your perspective, and you don't want to create a space for someone else. And that's this kind of a real statement of caste.
Hello and welcome to The Federal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we take a holistic look at one single issue. Today we will be discussing something which never fades away from the Indian social and political discourse, that is caste. But we will not be talking about caste in India. We will be talking about caste outside India. You might say, but caste is a typically Indian problem, or rather an Indian issue. I will say that no, it isn't, because I have read a very important and a very comprehensively researched book by a scholar, which says that wherever Indians have gone, there is caste. So I am speaking today to Suraj Milind Yengde, who is in the faculty of the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. And he has written this very important and informative book, which is meticulously researched, Caste, a Global Story. The title says it all. Thank you very much, Suraj, for joining us on this program. And first of all, congratulations on a very fine book. It gives a completely new dimension to the issue of caste, which us journalists have been actually tracking right from the time that we became journalists. First initially as assaults on caste, assaults on the Dalits or on the other lower castes, and thereafter, politics of this country has revolved around the issue of caste. So there have been several chapters. So welcome to this program, Suraj. First of all, let me ask you about the fact that you have said that wherever Indians have gone, there is caste. So can we say that caste tracks us the way a birthmark on skin does, that whatever we may do, we can never rid ourselves of caste. Wherever we might go, whatever profession that we are engaged in, caste is something which is a constant label which we have to carry.
Thank you so much for this kind invitation, Lanjan, and also to the team of Federal for having me. I think it is probably the first video segment I'm ever doing on the book. It's out for a long time, and I was just not ready yet mentally. And as an author, you may also know sometimes
Yes.
we just need the right time. Sometimes the book is out, but the consequence of timing.
About it.
Do you know what I mean? Like the consequence, because it's something of that nature where you have worked on it for so long that at some point when the book is out, now you are like, okay, let me take a step back, and so somehow mentally I was just ill prepared, or rather just inadequately ready to face camera or do any. So I'm very grateful to you for extending this warm invite, for having engaged with the book, and to inviting me to discuss this text. As regards your question, Nilanjan, one thing, the migratory aspects of caste was actually documented by Sridhar Venkatesh Ketkar, was an anthropologist from Cornell early on. And he wrote a very succinct text on caste of the times in the early 20th century. And he's someone who's also accessing lots of anthropological research, and then he kind of returns. S.V. Ketkar is a kind of interesting person, gets back to India, writes extensively in Marathi. Dr. Ambedkar kind of picks up on his theory of that migration and caste being kind of attached to this Indian body politics, or so to say Hindu body politic. And that sort of continues over the period. And I think, as I demonstrate in my research, you may come across that it's nearly 15 countries that are kind of touched upon
Yes.
in this book, where I've interviewed people from the descendants of indenture who have left the Bengal shores from the kind of mostly Bihar and UP region, and also some parts of Bengal and Odisha as well, to the Gulf migrants who are currently from across India, mostly Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, or Tamil Nadu,
Punjab.
and Punjab as well. Most definitely, Punjab features as kind of a bigger picture in the UK sphere. So when we see this kind of diverse perspectives of labor, then we also come across this kind of a modernized IT labor, where you see post Mandal 1990s era migration that kind of takes place is very conscious of caste. Not that the previous was not, but if you think about 1964 Civil Rights Act, that opens up space for many potential Indian immigrants to come and contribute to the American economy. Now, mind you, America is not really the first place people want to go, because we are still very much in anglophone in the
Yes.
sense of most kind of in this kind of Victorian British idea, and the anglophone sphere doesn't really feature as prominently into the preferred destination. People would kind of go to Germany or England, but America was still yet far, right? Because the idea of migration was not to go and settle, it was for you to come back and so forth. But during those times, also we see this kind of new attention and attraction happens towards America. There's lots of politics happening. That's how we see people when they leave India. They don't necessarily think of caste as something they need to consciously carry. They carry it as something that belongs to their cultural appetite. That's something that's their, so to say, a lightweight carry on that they can take on and engage with a fellow American or any other person in any other country. And I think that's how the global caste kind of angle we saw, especially the diasporic Dalit and Indian caste system, we noticed is very much in cahoots, or rather in conversation with the white person, the British colonial overseer, and so forth. We see also in American economy.
Yeah. Uh, you know, when one talks about your book, and you also mentioned in your question that you studied almost as many as 15 countries where Indians have gone, and there has been studying the caste dimension. The biggest question of, issue of caste that we see in India is the marginalization and also the stigmatization of the Dalits. That is something that we see. What do we see when the Indians go abroad? Does the same kind of an approach follow? Related to this is another very important question which figures very prominently in Indian politics. What about those Dalits who converted to other religions? Other religions meaning only two specific quote unquote problematic religions, Christianity and Islam.
That's right.
Despite conversion, caste still prevails. We know that completely in India. Supreme Court has come out with a judgment which says that if you convert to either Christianity or Islam, if the Dalits convert, then they will lose the right of reservation which is enshrined in our laws. Two things is that one, how is this likely to, what is going to be the likely response of Dalits in other countries, even though the fact is that they are not in any case going to benefit from the reservation policy because they remain, Indians only in some kind of a distant identity, not for all practical purposes. They are, residents of the country that they have adopted. Most of them are also citizens by now. The second is that how does it play out in different communities? I have seen in your book that you have talked about Trinidad and Tobago, where there has been a complete different kind of an assimilative process of the Dalits compared to the other places where it has not been. I'd like to hear you on this.
No, thank you for really asking the breadth of question. I think it opens up vistas. Also, I think it's
Yeah.
so interesting that if you read a history book, which is what we are doing today, there is so much contemporaneity, and caste. That's why becomes so uh, persistent and so much live an issue that you can talk about 19th century
Hmm.
faraway land of a in Caribbean called Trinidad, and then also talk about that right today when the Supreme Court is talking about caste. So I think that's what this global picture of caste really connotes. And it also narrates to us that there are so many semiotics that work alongside. Religion is a part of it. And in within the Trinidadian context, we saw the assimilation of this, Dalit and as well as other, I mean, they're partly a little bit Adivasis, not many, but also lower caste Shudras into the fold of this kind of creating a more national religious identity. And that doesn't really always differentiate because religion here is really reflective of culture. And for the people who convert to, for example, Christianity, especially, you notice that on the coastal kind of belts, right? You begin from Odisha to the Andhra coastal belt to going to Tamil Nadu. Much of that the people, fisher folks and Dalits and so forth, had converted early on. I mean, they have a trajectory and history of nearly 150 plus years of being Christians, and yet the Dalit kind of identity sustains.
Stays with them.
Certainly, because also you see the architecture of caste conversion was not singular for focused on one caste. We know Robert D. Nelly, the earlier Jesuit priest who had come in the 17th century. He's focused on let's convert Brahmins because once we convert Brahmins, they can assist and aid us in kind of proliferalizing this project in the hinterlands. That certainly happens at a point, but then the project kind of evolves. Similarly, here, these accessible people who were there, who were benevolent, and within the British Raj, you could gain certain material access, which provided much of the kind of spatial geo approach to looking at world, which is not just India or your own space, but looking at the broader world. And then in this case, caste then bolsters up. The other religion that really takes a magnified approach really blows up kind of in a revolting fashion was Ravidasya. Now this is in the process of forming, where the Chamars had their own congregation, and the reason they had their own congregation, and they've been having this for many many years. I mean, it's almost a 8 decade long history of separate slash segregated congregation in the diaspora. Obviously, it didn't start off as such. They were all together. They were all followers and worshippers of the gurus within the Sikh canon, and they would bow to the Guru Granth Sahib and so forth. But yet, the discrimination kind of cropped up, and I noticed this in a very distant island in Canada, off the coast of Vancouver, where you would drive there and you would think, oh, this is such a isolated island, and you think about people coming there 120, 30 years ago and trying to establish the Sikh temple and so forth. And yet there they have the consciousness of their caste. So somehow it kind of really reverberates this genome of Indian psyche that continues to evolve. But then it doesn't become Indian anymore, right? As you have also said, they become citizens of their country. I mean, they are hyphenated Indian, for example. In some cases, that identity attaches to them. But most
Yes.
often time, two, three, four generations, they are like, I was talking to the descendants of the early migrant arrivals in Canada, Komakatamaru and other boats that had come. Uh, they have a very kind of skewed consciousness of being Indian. I mean, they have married across, and you know what I mean is like they have a
Yes.
very sensibility that has evolved, and that's why the contemporary migration that you see happening, especially among uh, the tech workers, but also financial industry and other service providing industry folks, there is this element and recognition. And I think if I look at the contemporary archive, in the past 15 years nearly, that caste angle has really hyped, and it has to do with what happens in India. So we see this kind of what they call, Stephen Wertowik called distant diasporas, near diasporas. And these are not just distant and near, these are peripatetic. These are constantly moving, evolving diasporas. And something that I'm going to do this summer is to spend time in Europe documenting Dalits there, and they are also asserting themselves. And European geography has also had this element of caste assertion, but it is not a caste assertion for people to say pro caste. This is basically a anti-caste kind of protest by this kind of Dalit Ambedkarite identity. So we see there's lots of things interestingly taking place at the same time, and at the same in the same vein, what happens in India influences their decisions, and so forth.
What about the response of the upper caste Hindus, who are actually looking at this process of Dalits across, different parts of the world, uniting, getting into some kind of an organization and being more collective than in the past? How do they respond to this kind of a growing identity, a community identity of the Dalits?
I think it's interesting you ask, because especially I mean, at least this kind of surface level observation that I've had, and that's why I'm saying surface level. I've not gone deep into any kind of empirical or quantitative numbers. I don't have, but you generally see people from the technical fields who are coming out of this technological institutes. The chambers of their education is very much rooted around algorithms and whatever.
Yes.
And so the people who have had this background of social science education and people in I mean, there is certainly a strong protest against caste discrimination also by the dominant caste folks, but majority of them are not. They are in the IT or related industry that really comes, they are coming, emerging out of this huge anti-reservation, anti-Dalit kind of sentimentality. And they don't know why they are. If you ask and question them, the usual defenses or responses, well, I was treated unfairly. That's the one kind of argument you see. But there is another segment that is there, which is second or third generation diaspora, the dominant caste. And for them, that caste angle was not really, didn't really matter to them, because the Dalit assertion was not there. So for them, you could be a Hindu and walk into a thing and flaunt your whatever caste without really thinking of it as an innocent way. For them, it was very innocent way of demonstrating your pride or your, and for them, it was also as, we didn't know anything about it. We grew up in this culture, and that's the whole context that the Dalit discourse brings forward, is to say it is not normal the way you assert yourself within the caste paradigms is and now you feel threatened because there are certain Dalit communities kind of asserting themselves, and asserting themselves doesn't mean pushing you back. They're just saying, we are also people, we also have an equal agency, we should also
We
consider,
want respect.
we want respect. And also the history that the way people kind of promote in the Western, especially dominant caste Indians, is very much this kind of post 1947 India's kind of foreign policy export, if you will. Oh, India is this country, and so many of them have that frozen view of India. Many of them, and this is, and I've talked to many people, they are shocked when they go to India, because for them the approach to India is very much of their ancestral land and so forth. But then when you step in, they are aghast. Because there's poverty on streets, you see begging, there's all kinds of things that's kind of come down rolling, that they have to now think about, oh, is our country really, the ancestral country really the country we hope to have? And so they are basically OCI citizens who have newer understanding. But I think the protest around caste is not really gaining as, but it had its own time in the past, from 2016 onwards to 2023, 22. Now it is not as much, because the kind of dust has been settled, and I don't know what is going on the field there.
I must thank you, for this book, because, I'll just share with you something from my personal life. A large number of my school friends, I finished school sometime in the late 70s, and that's the time I finished. And a large number of, at least 7 or 8 of us from our class, we grew up in a small town in North India, went into IITs, and after the IITs was over, they straight away, then all of them went to the States, there. In our WhatsApp group, there's clearly two groups, one group of students, people who stayed on here, and the other who went away. Now, over these, and I need to say that the entire class, at least to my understanding, I didn't actually go around trying to check caste at that time, because we as young children didn't really understand the issue, except that the Dalits were the people who cleaned the toilets in the campus town that we grew up in. That's the only thing that we really understood. So everybody was an upper caste Hindu, and they went there. They are all in very comfortable jobs. They've done very well over the last almost 50 years. They have been there. All of them have married. I do not think of anybody from our North Indian, classroom married anybody from the other races. They all married what their parents, the families decided, the same caste kind of thing. So that has been perpetuated. A few conversations with them, the issue of caste did come up, and they were very critical of the Dalits, just in the manner the others who have not gone outside India, are also, that they wouldn't, suppose suddenly, I pose this question, that suppose we discover that one of us at that time, we didn't know, but that person was a Dalit, then how are we going to respond to that person? Would that person continue to be part of our, gatherings or our WhatsApp groups, our conversations? So there was a strong no, no, then we will have to really think about it. We did it because we didn't know. So that has been there, So I'm just narrating this because I felt this was an interesting thing to share with you. But in your book, you talk about, the anti-caste legislation which has been voted in Seattle and California. Then you also mentioned the Rutgers University has a task force on caste discrimination. So then, does it mean that there has been a certain amount of pressure from the Dalits, which has actually led to these kind of legislative initiatives or various, studies in establishing a task force on caste discrimination within a campus? I think that is a fairly significant step.
I think you're right. I think I was witness to what it started off with Brandeis. And fortunately, at a conference where I was there, a former student who was not at Brandeis, but he studied engineering somewhere in Massachusetts, he raised the point as part of this kind of closing discussion to say we ought to have an intervention because there are many students like himself. Now he's a professional, but he was sharing his experiences, and there were no protections for people like him because it was very isolating experience and caste was very much on his face. That was taken up by Brandeis seriously, and then Brandeis kind of took on, and many other universities kind of followed. So the trigger for this was certainly led by Dalit, but then it also took autonomous kind of, I think it grew. I don't know who is at Rutgers, but I know a few people, but I'm not sure if there are like Dalit-led initiatives. But I think this is mostly a human rights or a civil rights concern for many South Asian academics who think about this seriously, and they want to do something. Because, one of the reasons, if you grew up in India, generally, or you grew up in diaspora, and you're conscious of certain, even a little bit of a social sentimentality, you will point your finger at caste. You won't take few years to or few steps. Within second or third step of discussing this, there will be caste that will come up to you. You cannot really evade the so-called phantom of caste that's so surrounding you. And so many South Asian academics and so forth have taken this, and the legislative paradigms are one of the ways that they're working. Now, Cisco I did not write on because I was part of one of the kind of teams that was conducting this thing, and it is unfair for me to comment, because let the court proceedings decide, because it is some of these things are sub judice, and also some court cases take time. Though I'm a legal scholar, I have training in law, but I thought it needs, because it's one of those watershed moments that people are kind of asserting. But there are various student-led organizational efforts, and there are so many Ambedkar or Ambedkarite student groups across the world. Now, I mean, somebody from Kyrgyzstan who's studying medicine reached out to me. Hey, we are celebrating Ambedkar Jayanti. Can you please send us a video message? And one would not expect, right? Kyrgyzstan within this kind of former Soviet republics, how would it exist? And so similarly, across the Western countries, majority of universities, young folks who are studying abroad have started. So you see that kind of confidence that they are gaining. And also that simply means that there are at least one or two Dalit students there, which really kind
Yeah.
of tells us about the presence of a certain sort of assertion. People
Mm.
always think that this assertion constitutes resistance, which it is not the case, right? You're just asserting yourself in the sense of, hey, listen, this is my culture. I grew up celebrating April 14th. This is this kind of music we have. Let me have my space. I mean, I have not celebrated, I don't know, whatever the celebrations are. It were kind of, it was culture. It was forced on me to celebrate XYZ festival because there was
Mm.
national holidays. Fine. But can we also create a space for Ambedkar's Jayanti? And then suddenly, oh no, what do you mean? Let's celebrate Diwali, let's celebrate Holi. This is all we are used to it. So that's how students have started to kind of form their own groups. And many, I've noticed, there are lots of supporters within this kind of social sciences, humanities, and law. I don't know about other
Mm.
disciplines and how they are functioning.
Okay, you talk about your childhood, which was in India, and as a Dalit boy, a father who had a job in a bank, but even though he may have wanted to, but he couldn't get out of segregation to a non-Dalit colony.
That's right.
Now, with that kind of a background, you grew up in India, definitely with a certain amount of stigmatization.
Yeah.
When you went outside India, did the same kind of experience follow you? I
It's
think
very
that is something
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
within the Indian community.
Yeah, I mean, I got just excited because that keeps coming back to me, Nilanjan, because it's true. It does. Because, stigma is something that I think it takes a whole therapeutic practice. You have to undergo that kind of mental cleansing, so to speak, to really rid of that stigma. Because, it's like that gooey, gummy structure in your mind. And
Hmm.
so for me, I was always ashamed of belonging to this Ambedkarite or Dalit kind of, you know semi
Yeah.
slum or colony, whatever you call it. It was basically, one of those open sewerage canals running outside, and defecating kids are defecating just outside the door and stuff like that. So that's the kind of background I grew up in. And that is the normal, right? The biggest concerns you have growing up in that circumstance is just that, oh Lord, let's hope the sewer doesn't get blocked because someone is going to
Yes.
drop a carry bag into the open canal, and then that thing is going to, nobody's going to take
It's slow.
accountability for that.
Yeah.
So you don't really think of what you call this kind of worldly material concerns as many times. So my father in that sense was a very anomaly, and that's why I wanted to tell, like Nanded, nobody almost knows. Let's just assume that, because
Hmm.
I would tell people I'm from Nanded, and people would be like, what? They would even mispronounce, and so I finally gave up. I would just say, people ask where are you from, I'll say Pune or Bombay, and they are 12 hours from my place, mind you.
Hmm.
So it didn't really make sense to kind of hide my identity, to pass on as an urban kind of person. It took several years for me to kind of come back to that realization, and that's why my theoretical observations also emanate from that spatial marginalization that kind of occurs within India. And we have to acknowledge that space and often has been the location and site of observing the world through certain paradigms of inequalities. In India, especially, development led policies really focus on that, but we
Yeah.
don't really articulate that in the theories of caste, gender, and so forth as much. Oftentimes, you will hear people articulating, but where it is usually articulated through bigger metropolises: Delhi,
Yeah.
Bombay, Ahmedabad, whatever, Chennai, and so forth, or Bengal. And this is why when I talk about the world,
Hmm.
I talk about a part of the world. Nanded is also a part of the world.
Part of the world, yes.
That's right. And so the gaze is to subvert, and to acknowledge that there are several factors that constitute into making of this new Dalit, what I call cosmopolitan universalism, which is emerging out of through several generations, that we notice. And I think that's why we that's why we get a flavor of this kind of interdisciplinary approach, because there is so much things happening there. Like my dad, he introduced me to Kofi Annan on a black and white
Yes.
Videocon TV.
Yes. That was one of the most memorable paragraphs, that, and immediately I, related to the fact that the comparison and the, if, the, uh, the liking, certain looking at it as part of the composite whole. The Dalit movement in here in India, and the movement of the blacks in the United States, Dalit Panthers, and you had the Black Panthers, so that immediately comes up. I would like to hear more about that, that how has this really played out when you have done your research, looking at the black as somebody who is identified by the color of her or his skin, just the way Dalits are, by the what I say, birthmark on the skin.
That's right. I think that's a very good articulation, birthmark on the skin. I think, see, that's why, people don't know this history. What happens is about, I don't know, a decade ago, I shot into limelight. Suddenly, publishing whatever, all of those things are happening. And people are like confused, like, why is he insistent on this kind of comparative politics and writing about it? And they are like, we are far removed. Even Dalits themselves, especially the urban middle class, lower middle class Dalits, have had that kind of approach to really see like what's going on. And that's why I think it took time to really realize that, like, I was not doing extra that would make feel that I'm unnecessarily stretching. It was kind of part of my consciousness. And the Dalit movement in India, one, especially after Ambedkar, did very interesting thing is they relied on the literary prowess of resistance. Literature became an avenue, and even today, the Dalit literary conferences are one of the most sought after incidents. Like the way people have this Ram Kathas and whatever that Kathas and whatever that gatherings
Yes.
and so. For Dalits, it's a literature conference, Dalit Sahitya Parishads or Sammilans, where from grandmother to all go to attend. And that's the space where you are sharing, where you are hearing, where you are seeing a performer. There are lots of kind of inner cues and jokes and lessons are traded on the stage, and the audience is responding to it. So it's very unique space. If you are not from the culture, you will have a difficulty acknowledging what's going on there as an outsider.
Okay.
So literary conferences, poetry recitations, and there's lots of things happening there. There is theater, there is dance, there's music, and so forth. And also, within that each performance, there is a strong resistance to claiming our own humanity within the paradigms of Ambedkarite, Phule, and the broader canonical thoughts of anti-caste figures. So for me, my kind of growing up happened within this tradition, where my father was, exposed also to the black. I mean, my father knew of Thomas Paine, for all and so for me, that Dalit, so people say Dalit is a sequestered, kind of backward, kind of lowly, kind of wave point. They don't understand that, by the time Kofi Annan was becoming United Nations Secretary General, there was a guy in Nanded, a peon in a bank, who kind of proudly claims on the agency of Kofi Annan, never mind his own kind of aristocratic origins, but to say there is a black man who is now the Secretary General who's calling shots at the UN. That's a big deal. And for my consciousness, great. And so I've had Kenyan friends from 8th grade onwards. So this is how I kind of visualize. And it's just not black America. It's also black Africa, and that's how also, you see me going to South Africa to do my PhD, first PhD. If I had a chance, I went there.
Yes. You also referred to the George Floyd incident of 20 a few years ago.
20,
Exactly.
2020.
Now, you referred to the fact that, there is a large Indian community there, upper castes also, who are politically progressive, and they were at the forefront of campaign. But as far as the Dalit matter goes, that there was an ironical thing that they are coming out. So I would like you to explain this irony which you noticed and that you commented in the book.
Thank you for bring that up. It's very ironical. Like I was noticing, like because you see, because it was also the George Floyd incident really was a revolt of the people from, usually revolt is led by people who are at the most margins. They are the most vulnerable people and they don't like the system. But then, it kind of galvanized into a way, and Hollywood and big stars kind of contributed. And so the Indian elites also wanted to be part of that. They were not invited, but they wanted to be part of it. So you see the likes of uninvited guests like Priyanka Chopra and all these Western based celebrities, or also their acolytes. They
Right.
were really kind of posting on it. And I was like, hold on, just take a step back. I mean, this is great, but do you see how ironical is that? Like, what you have done in your life to really make a life of a black person more equal? Have you done anything? Let's forget about black person. What have you done in your own home country where you have
That's right.
crowned
What have you
yourself Miss
done
India?
done to make Dalits more integrated and as equals? You
and
really
and
think?
that was the ironical kind of formulae that we can talk about this, because you know what, once they claim on George Floyd, they're actually benefiting, because they also want to claim that kind of oppressed tag in Western white people's eyes. So the elites here are inferior here, and for them, they want to have best of the both worlds. And it's unfortunate that the caste view presents and centralizes your own self, that you obsess the world only through your perspective, and you don't want to create a space for someone else. And that's this kind of a real statement of caste, the way we understand it operating today.
Yeah, while just reading up before this conversation with you, I also came across some of your views. During the 2016 period, when there was a certain an attack on Dalit students in Indian universities. Essentially, it came to the fore with the Rohit Vemula case, and thereafter there's a series of agitations by the Dalits at that point. And what I want to really understand is that the Dalits and the non-Dalits,
Hmm.
outside India, where you say is also this theater of caste,
Hmm.
how are they reacting, even though they have no stakes in politics in India? They're not voters here. They have possibly, many of them may not even have been able to trace the roots of their, the family roots may not have been traced by them. How do they look at politics within India and the targeting of Dalits? I also, you refer to the incident in 1982 when a group of Dalit students came and protested against Indira Gandhi's visit, and she was very angry. She said, "No, the government does, and we
Yeah,
take very good care of them." In the last few years, we have had a government which has actually cultivated the diaspora,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
we have had a prime minister who has gone and uh, you know taken the diaspora along and projected himself, if I can actually use such a phrase, not just as the prime minister of India, but also as a protector of Hindus all over the world. In a situation like that, has there been any kind of a reaction to the attacks on Dalits within India, which are an ongoing phenomenon? At any point of time, the media, there are phases when they report every incident, then there is a long 6 month period where they do not report even a single incident. Again, something very brutalized, a very brutal attack happens, suddenly it gets into the front page. Slowly it
Mhm.
starts dropping into the third page, seventh page, and thereafter it completely disappears. So, what has been the response of them to the events in India?
It's kind of interesting, given that the geography of our Indian subcontinent is so diverse. Each almost state has its own kind of approach to India, as you may know. So, for example, the Punjabi diaspora is still very much, in conversation, because you see the assertion of caste pride within the Punjabi sphere is very strong. The Jats, for example, assert themselves unequivocally, and then there are the Chamars or the Bhangis who kind of push back on them. And that kind of, especially among I've seen the second or third generation, they are not as much involved, but there are some who take that approach. But then that is again clubbed with that sub-nationalist kind of rhetoric of Punjabi nationalism, as opposed to this Indian, and there is a caste. Then there is a Tamilian kind of view of the world, which is very much located within the Tamil sphere. And there also you see the cadres, and I've reported in the book, there is a VCK political party whose cadres are in Kuwait and elsewhere, and they kind of, file behind this kind of movement. So you see, the Dalit diaspora is someone that will not stand with this cultivated diasporic viewpoint of Modi, because that diaspora view excludes Dalits. There is no conscious effort to include Dalits in this kind of diasporic dialogue, and it's really unfortunate that the head of the state or the Indian state itself, as an apparatus, doesn't consider this as a positive resource. There's one thing though happened. Um, Dalits were already existing, and they were asserting, and they were utilizing various academic spaces. For them, it's not about this creating balkanized India. For them, it's more about asserting on the republic as a whole through this constitutional Ambedkarite
Right.
morality. They couldn't tap into that. And then only recently, since Modi started to do this 14th April, and then they saw this great opportunity and vacuum, they started appropriating without even spending a dime on it. And now this whole
Right.
foreign policy embassies and all, that's just one of those boring, yawning things they do without any kind of output. But the other events of this Hindu pride certainly receive this kind of huge attention. And that also means which kind of people, what kind of state is kind of there. Nilanjan, the one thing that really shifted since Modi's the 2.0 term was that the operatives within the BJP were now working with diasporic moles. These are the people who were sniffing the information of activists who were thinking about a democratic plural India, right? Just not academics, but regular folks. And this kind of doxing information was done. And it so happened I was interacting with one BJP leader. He told me this information, unbeknownst to him, that, and he meant good, in the sense of he was trying to tell me, Suraj, watch out for yourself. There is this things. And I was like, who told you? And then he listed me the name of organizations who I cannot name for obvious confidential
Right.
reasons. But these were obviously the groups. You Google it and you will see their names all over the place. And I was like, I wonder, why are they being that extended arm of the Indian secret state? And I think this is where fundamentally they chicken out. For them, it's more about taking personal grouse against someone. But when it comes to Trump's tariffs and other form of economic wars, you don't see them with equal loud mouth. So there is
Right.
something sinister about it. There is something very RSS inspired Hindutva about it. And I think we have to really observe it with that kind of and I think this will only happen, Nilanjan, if you just focus little less attention on this kind of Hindu Muslimization of the politics. If you also look at the class and caste angle to this, you will see this class dynamics also play, and then you
No,
will
we,
see, yeah,
yeah, within India, we have been seeing, this entire caste and, dynamics which has been at play. That even though on the face of it, they say that we are, a truly inclusive society as far
that's
as
right.
Hindu order goes, but deep down, they are actually strengthening the Varna system. They are strengthening, all those which actually take the, increase the stranglehold of the upper caste in India's politics and society. Uh, Suraj, we could have continued to converse for many, many hours, but unfortunately we have run out of time. And what does come across is, and I hope that the viewers would agree, that caste is indeed a global challenge. It is not an Indian challenge alone. It's not a domestic issue. It's a global issue, because wherever we have gone, we have carried the bad baggage along. That is there. That is there. And I congratulate you once again on this,
Thank you.
brilliant book. And I hope that you continue this research, because we need more information. In fact, towards the very end, you started saying, what is being done by the people who are committed to Hindutva, what they are trying to do outside India. So I think, that is something which we need to know more. The global strategy of working with the Indian diaspora, of the Sangh Parivar, of the RSS, and the BJP. That is something which we need to do.
Can I quickly come in on that
Sure,
very for 30
sure.
seconds? Just wanted to say,
No,
because
no,
this
sure.
this operative of this kind of how this Hindutva project works, I think I trace that. I mean, obviously, especially in Trinidad, as through the
Yes,
story of one kind of patron who is a very disciplined RSS man, you know, and through his biographical insights, you get to how Hindutva
Ization.
ization is
Yes.
undertaking, and it is not like this apparent Hindutva that we see on the streets. It's a very subtle, very normative, very assertive way of becoming Hindu, and that line become Hindu and Hindutva blurs so quickly that one doesn't even realize. And I think that's there in this
Yes,
long chapter on Trinidad, as you'll read. Yeah,
yes. Well, thank you once again, and
thank you.
congratulations.